Julio Iglesias. 14 languages, one broken heart. There's a version of success that looks like having everything: the crowds, the recognition, the world at your feet, and still feeling like you're performing for someone you've never actually met. Most people never notice this about themselves, but sometimes life arranges a moment so precise, so unrepeatable, that you can't look away from it. Julio Iglesias spent most of his life building walls fluent enough to sound like doors. He learned to speak in 14 languages: Spanish, English, French, Italian, Portuguese, German, Japanese, Russian, Hebrew, Arabic, Tagalog, and more. Not because he was naturally gifted with tongues, but because one evening in Paris in 1970, a woman in the third row laughed at his accent, not at his singing, at the way he stumbled through a simple greeting between songs. That laugh, brief and careless, lodged itself somewhere deep, and he carried it for decades, like a splinter he kept pressing just to feel it. He hired tutors in every city he visited: French in Paris, English in London, Italian in Rome. He didn't just memorize vocabulary, he studied the emotional architecture of each language, the way a French phrase holds its meaning slightly behind the words, the way Japanese communicates love by describing the moon. He wanted to dream in these languages, to think in them, to reach people in the most intimate room of their own minds. And in many ways, he succeeded. Over 300 million records sold. Markets that had never opened to a Western artist suddenly opened to him. He wasn't a Spanish singer performing abroad. He was, somehow, from everywhere. But the people closest to him started noticing something strange. His children would sit at dinner while he spoke to them in whatever language he was currently perfecting, turning family meals into a kind of accidental language lab. A former girlfriend once said that even in his most private moments, he whispered in 5 different languages, and she realized eventually that he wasn't being romantic. He was practicing. There's a difference between reaching for someone and rehearsing the gesture of reaching. He had mastered the second so thoroughly that he'd nearly forgotten the first existed. His language teachers saw it clearly. One of his Portuguese tutors observed that Julio didn't seem to want to communicate so much as to control. Each new language was another territory made safe, another culture that couldn't laugh at him. The man who had started all of this to avoid humiliation had become, in a way, addicted to the small victories of fluency. He could say "I love you" in 14 languages. Whether he meant it in any of them was a harder question. The fracture showed most visibly during a concert in Germany in 1990. Midway through a song, he lost track of which language he was supposed to be in. He started in German, shifted to Spanish, then drifted into English, and for a brief, disorienting moment, the audience wasn't sure what they were hearing. Neither was he. It was the same feeling he'd had 2 decades earlier in Paris, standing under stage lights with his accent exposed. Only this time, the thing that felt foreign wasn't his French, it was himself. He started working with a therapist after that. Someone who, perhaps not coincidentally, spoke only Spanish, his first language. The one he hadn't chosen, hadn't studied, hadn't earned. Just the language he'd been born into, the one that lived in him before ambition did. Then, in 1995, he went back to Paris, back to the Olympia Theatre, the same stage where the whole obsession had started. He walked out to a full house, waited a beat, and then spoke in French. Not phonetically memorized French, not performed French, but the real thing, warm, unhurried, carrying the weight of 25 years. The audience gave him a standing ovation before he sang a single note. After the show, an elderly woman came backstage. She had been in the audience in 1970. She was the one who had laughed. She stood in front of him and said, in French, that she owed him an apology, that 25 years ago she had laughed at his accent, and tonight he had taught her that love has no accent, only sincerity. He didn't know what to say, which for a man who spoke 14 languages was its own kind of answer. But Paris wasn't the moment that changed him most. That came 12 years earlier, on an October night in Madrid, and it had nothing to do with language at all. It was 1982, the Palacio de los Deportes, 15,000 people, a concert at the height of his fame. He was mid-performance when, through the crowd, He caught a movement that didn't fit. A woman had collapsed in the third row. People nearby were panicking. Security was slow to respond, unsure how to move through the density of the crowd. He stopped the music. Not paused it, stopped it. He asked for silence, and 15,000 people went quiet. Then he stepped off the stage and walked into the audience, something he had never done mid-concert, pushing past his own security team, who were trying to redirect him back toward protocol and away from liability. He reached the woman, a nurse named Maria Carmen, who had saved for months to buy those tickets as a birthday gift for her daughter. She was unconscious, her color wrong, her breathing shallow. Her 19-year-old daughter was beside her, holding her hand and crying. He knelt down and asked for her name. Then he began to sing to her, not to the arena, not amplified, just quietly, close to her. His voice meant for one person, her favorite song. When the paramedics arrived and prepared to move her, he told them he was coming with them. They objected. He got in the ambulance anyway. The headlines the next morning were not kind. Julio Iglesias abandons concert. Singer walks out on fans. There's a particular cruelty in how quickly the public can reframe an act of compassion as a professional failure, and the media was efficient about it. But he stayed at the hospital for 6 hours, still in his sequined concert jacket, now wrinkled and out of place under fluorescent lights, waiting like any other worried family member. Doctors and nurses recognized him and quietly left him alone. It didn't look like a publicity move. It didn't look like anything except what it was. Maria Carmen survived. Her cardiologist later said the outcome shouldn't have been possible. The type of heart attack she had, the delay in treatment, the circumstances all pointed elsewhere. He wasn't willing to make medical claims he couldn't support, but he said something that stayed with him, that there is growing evidence the brain continues to respond to familiar voices and music, even in unconscious states, that the emotional associations we carry don't go quiet just because we do. He said Julio's voice, close and steady in those first minutes, may have mattered more than anyone would ever be able to prove. When she woke in the ICU and found him sitting beside her, she asked if she was dead. He told her she wasn't, and that she was going to stay that way. She cried. She told him he had left 15,000 people for her. He said the concert could happen again. She couldn't. She became a lifelong friend. Every year on October 15th, he would call, not to talk about the night he'd helped save her life, but to thank her. He said she had shown him what his voice was actually for, that he'd always known music could move people. That night he learned it could reach them in places where nothing else could. 6 months later, he returned to the Palacio de los Deportes to finish the concert he had walked out of. Maria Carmen was in the front row when he sang Amor, the same song he had whispered to her in the dark of that arena. The crowd understood something that doesn't translate well into language. At the end, he brought her on stage and said that this woman had taught him that music isn't about entertaining people. It's about being human with them. He started the Maria Carmen Foundation after that, funding medical equipment for hospitals across Spain. He began visiting patients, not for press, just because something had shifted in how he understood his own presence in the world. The applause he had spent his career building toward suddenly felt like a lesser thing compared to what he'd felt in that ambulance. There's a pattern in his life that only becomes visible when you look at both halves of it together. A man so afraid of being rejected for how he sounds that he spends decades perfecting the sound. And then, in one unrehearsed moment, abandoning the performance entirely, climbing off a stage, getting into an ambulance, sitting under hospital lights with a stranger, and finding that the most honest thing he ever did with his voice was whisper it to someone who might not even be able to hear him. He learned 14 languages to make sure no one would ever again mistake him for a foreigner. But the thing that turned out to matter most about him had no language at all. It was just a choice, made quickly, to stop the music and walk toward the person who needed it most. Sometimes, what we spend years building is less important than what we do in the moment we decide to set it down.